everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for coming. We wanted to talk about a little bit. Well, first of all, I have a video on tuning. Has anyone here seen the tuning video?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So what we were trying to do when we accomplished something like this is, I used to get people who'd call me, and they'd say, "We really like the way the kits sound." Hey man, good to see you. We really like the way the kits sound, and can you tell us, what you do? I said, yeah, okay. And we got more and more calls for it, so we did the video. And what I generally said, it probably makes sense to just talk a little bit about what we do, why we do it, but to kind of preface it with what I said on the video is like there's no right way or wrong way to do this. It's just this is what I do, works for me. If it works for you, great. So there were a couple of things when I think about this. I go back to when I learned tuning when I was young. And the funny part about this is that we talked about this with a friend of mine who teaches at Berkeley. And I said, it's a funny thing. When I grew up, nobody ever taught you how to tune the drum set. You went for a guitar lesson, the first thing you did was learn how to tune the guitar, because otherwise you can't play it. But nobody taught you how to tune the drum set. So guys would go, maybe you learned on a practice pad for a while, but then you started playing on a drum set, but nobody actually helped you figure out what was supposed to be done. And my friend who teaches at Berkeley, Neil Smith, great guy, he says he's got people still walking into Berkeley College, entering college, that have no idea how to tune the instrument. None whatsoever. And he said, I don't know, he said it's still going on today. People aren't teaching them what they need to know. And it's very strange. Part of it is a lot of guys are growing up well, I guess it is. Time goes by. I'm 65, so a lot of time has passed since I first started playing when I was 12. But people today have so many things going on that everything gets compensated, so nobody worries about having to actually tune because you've got somebody EQing a house mix for you, and you've got this muffled head and that muffled head, and you've got triggers and all this other jazz. So to some degree, people don't learn it. Maybe people don't think it's necessary. But to me, if you play in an acoustic environment, we don't have guys running around dragging our drum sets around for us. We don't have drum techs. We don't have guys doing all the work for us. We got to do it ourselves. And generally, all of us have to play in different rooms. So, you play in this room with carpet and low ceilings and good acoustics, and the kit sounds one way. You go and play a wedding gig, and you got hard floors, a lot of glass windows, high ceilings, and the sound's bouncing all over the place, and it's a train wreck. So people need to learn how to dial in the instrument for what it does, and then figure out how to adjust it for when you go play. So part of it in the instrument itself, you get back to tuning, and we used to figure out, okay, what is it that the instrument's supposed to do? To me, it's supposed to project a certain sound. There's a character to the sound of the instrument, and you want to project that. You also want to make it such that it's easier for you to play, not harder. There's a lot of different things on tuning, and one of the fundamental things that I do is I always tune the top head tighter than the bottom head. And a lot of guys go, well, I tune the bottom head really tight and the top loose. I said, well, it's okay. But you have to think about what the drum's supposed to do. The drum is supposed to project the sound out to the audience. Okay? So if this bottom head, that's the resonant head, that creates the resonance. If that's really, really, really tight, well, it's not going to resonate very much. And what's going to happen is the sound's going to go this way, but it's not going to go that way. So there were some guys that I would go see. In New York, I went to see a friend of mine play, and he tuned that way, tight bottom, loose top. And he was in an environment where he had to play acoustically with no mics. So think about something for a minute. If you got a situation where if you tune tight on the bottom, and this drum is tuned way too tight on the bottom right now, but I'll adjust it a little bit. If you have an environment where you're close mic'd, then if the sound is pushing up toward you, but the microphone's sitting right here, or right here and right here, the mic's going to catch it, it's going to go out in the house mix, and everybody's going to hear it fine. Take all those mics away, which is the case when I went to see my friend play. It was an acoustic gig, it was a jazz club, no mics. He would play, and it would look like he was killing it, and out in the audience you couldn't hear anything, couldn't hear his toms. And he said, man, how does it sound? I said, well, I'm not sure because I can't hear you. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, it sounds like you think you're killing it, right? He said, yeah. I said, it's not happening. It's all going up. It's all going up in your face. It's not going out to everybody else. So I use the concept of saying, I'm not close mic'd. If I was close mic'd, fine, doesn't matter. It's all going to get EQ'd in the mix. It's going to go out there. Maybe you got in-ear monitors. Everything sounds great. But if you're not doing that, then you got to think about how does the sound reach the audience. So when I tune the top head a little tighter than the bottom. And people go, well, what do? The topic comes up of drum dials. I said, I don't use a drum dial. I tune by ear and by feel. So what I would generally do, and we'll do some examples, but I'll tune the bottom, and maybe I do the bottom, maybe let's call it like 1 full turn each. And then I'll take the top and I'll tune the top maybe 1 1/4 turns each ride to get a balance. And to me, the drum has to have a sense for, see, so when I tweak, let me just tweak this just a second here. To me, I like to have a little sense of resonance and some overtones. And the overtones are another thing that we should talk about a little bit. In the shop here and sometimes in our shop in New York, people come in who are testing a drum and, they'll say, yeah, they got the snares and they're playing it, but, there's still too much snare buzz. And I said, how are you going to use the drum? Are you going to use the drum at home sitting in the living room just playing on the drum, or are you going to go out and play in a band? Because those little things that you're hearing, just like when people test a cymbal, and cymbals all have different harmonics. Well, if you just sit here and all you're listening to is the cymbal, we're going to hear every single harmonic that exists there. But those get eliminated when you start to actually play in the band. So what you got to focus on is, does that cymbal have enough stick definition to cut through, and not worry so much about, when I stop playing and I listen, there's this little ring for 0.3 of a second. Don't worry about it. Same thing with a little bit on the snare drum. You're going to have a little bit of vibration. You're supposed to. That's what it's meant to do. So I think about it as, I want it to sound like there's some resonance there. And I play it by the edge. You can hear there's a ring there, okay? Because I like there to be, when I sit at the drum, I like the drum to work well for me everywhere on the head. So if you now there's guys who play, in R&B bands, and they just want a really big, fat 2/4 backbeat, and that's all they're worried about. Well, that's fine. You can tighten up the snares as much as you want, but the more you tighten up the snare wires, it's going to eliminate the snare buzz, but it's also going to choke the drum. Yeah. So you're not going to get any sensitivity. But if you're playing the R&B band and you just want 2 and 4, it's okay. If you're happy with it, it's fine. I like it to be more sensitive and more responsive all around. And the other part of that is I don't want to work any harder than I have to work to play the drum. So if you think about it, if you have a tight bottom head and a loose top head, you lose the ability for the drum to do a lot of the work. The drum should do a lot of the work. It should, there should be rebound that makes your life easier. Well, if the top head's loose, you don't have rebound. So then you've got to execute everything. You got to work harder than you need to. The other thing when you think about these is you think about, well, all drums are kind of created equal. Yes and no. Bearing edges are something, most drums today are a sharper bearing edge. The standard edge is kind of like a 45. So it's a sharp edge. And you think about it like the bridge on a violin or an acoustic instrument. It's sharp. So if you have a shell with a sharp edge, then that's going to leave you with more vibrations, which means more overtones. And it's going to give you more sensitivity, and it's probably going to give you a wider tuning range. The opposite of that is something that was back in the 40s and 50s, the baseball bat edge, for lack of a better word. It's a very rounded edge. So it's, instead of like this, you've got almost like a half moon there, rounded edge. That rounded edge was used on those early shells that were like mahogany, poplar mahogany, 3-plies, or maple, poplar, maple, with that rounded edge top and bottom. that rounded edge makes a lot more contact with the head. So it almost serves as if it's got its own muffling system in a way. More contact between the wood and the head takes some of the overtones out. And when you think about those drums from that era, those drums were mostly 9x13, 16/16, 14x22, or maybe 24 bass drums. They were big drums. They were used for big band, and then later on in the 50s for rock, 50s and 60s, classic rock. And you think about those sounds, they're big drums, medium to low tuning so that they can resonate enough, and medium, and you think about medium to low tuning, larger size drums. And the reason, when you think about those drums, if you were to take those drums and tune them up to bebop range with a rounded edge on the bottom and a rounded edge on the top, it's not going to be very resonant. They're not going to project as much. They're not going to resonate as much. So those rounded edges and those shells were made for medium to low tuning and fatter sound. If you've got a snare drum in front of you then that's like a 60s era drum and it's got those rounded edges, you have to kind of take that into account to some degree. You have to say to yourself, okay, if I want maximum sensitivity out at the edges and I've got a rounded bearing edge up there, well, if I tune that thing tight, it's not going to happen. So you might have to tune that particular drum a little looser than another to get the same thing out of it. To me, I like to hear that little bit of ring out there. And when you bring the wires up, there's ring there, right? But the sound is there. The sound cuts. And out at the edges, you want the sensitivity at the edges. Now, today you got a drum like this. This is a Craviato solid shell, and it's a bird's eye maple drum, which is incredible. Oops, my mic's on here in a second here. Pop the mic back on. But if any of you have the snare drum that's got the Trick strainer on it, Trick's got a 3-position strainer, which is kind of cool. So, when you got it off and you lock it in here to the first slot, you got that resonance. You lock it into the second slot, tightens it up a little bit more. The third slot dries it up quite a bit more. So the virtue of that is a simplicity thing. It's just that if you've got the drum where you like it, let's say you like it in the first position right here, but you just want to dry it up a little bit, just snap it over. And you don't have to goof around with the knob. That's all. It's just really nice to do that. But the other thing that we find becomes an issue is people tend to choke the drum. And you're going to choke the drum by cranking it up too high. I mean, you can do it if you want. I mean, we can do it over here. And that's what you got. Now, to me, it's dead. That's the center. It's a deader sound. But if you had a microphone over this and it was going through a mix, it'll add a little reverb to it, it'll add a little whatever, and it'll sound fine in the house mix. To me, by itself, I don't like it. At the edges, start to lose the snare sound, start to sound like a tom out at the edges. So, that's what happens when you crank it up too tight. But one of the things, when you think about what to do on the bottom, I'll use an example, a different drum as an example. You've got Rogers fans in the house here, I'm sure, right? And Rogers made something called the Dynasonic snare. And this is the prototype for the new Rogers USA wood Dynasonics, which I had at the Chicago show, if anybody was here. So, and I did have a video of this drum that I did after the Chicago show. Rogers designed, Joe Thompson of Rogers designed something with Buddy Rich in mind, and the idea there was, when you think about snare sound, let's assume you've got the heads tuned to the pitch you want, but then this concept of not getting a choked sound. So they came up with this concept that said, well, everybody's usually cranking it up over here and they choke the drum. We got a great idea. We're going to create this frame here, and we're going to mount the snare wires. The snare wires are actually mounted on this frame. There's a screw on the other side there. There. The wires are mounted on the frame. And the concept was, you bring this strainer up, and with this knob, the normal strainer arm, what you're doing is actually raising this bar against the bottom of the head. But you don't want this bar to be jammed up against the bottom of the head, because then the drum's choked. So you bring this up to, as they used to say, just kiss the bottom of the head. But then if you want more or less snare vibration, there's a knob here. You dial it in with that knob. If you turn that knob, it tightens the snares on the frame, so it cuts down some of the snare buzz. You loosen it, it loosens it, right? So, and when it's done right, these drums, guys either love these drums or they hate them, because they require a little bit of investment in time to understand how best to use this tuning. And I have a YouTube video on my channel of a separate video just for that drum, this drum, an original Dynasonic, but the same concept. So to me, when executed properly, it's fabulous. So here, now this is tuned to my tuning, so it's tight. But sensitivity. Now, you know, you can crank it up here a little more if you need to. Dry it up. You can dry it up with the knob on the frame. Right? And the other thing is, and this is missing on a lot of drums today, tone control, okay? And again, some of the same people who tell me they hate tone controls, they don't need them, are the same people that have a blanket inside the bass drum. You know what I mean? Okay? So, or Evans oil heads on the toms, or, you know, Remo black dot, silver dot heads. So, you know, so it's kind of like, okay. I look at it and go, well, I think the tone controls are kind of cool, because you think about, again, if you've got the drum tuned the way you like it, and you're in this place and it's fine, you don't need the tone control. But you get into the wedding hall, and the ceiling's 30 feet, and it's glass and all that. It's a pain in the rear end. The sound's bouncing all over the place. You take this little knob and you just dial it in. So, you know, okay, so here, I like it here. All right, so we got to bring it down. Still works. But just cuts it down. So you can play, the point of the tone controls, and I've told this to guys on Gretsch drums, it's the same thing. This is a vintage build Gretsch kit. Tone controls, right? Top and bottom, okay? On the top and the bottom.
And bottom.
Yep. You know, again, same rough idea there. Let me fix this leg. Same general idea. What you got is the ability to dial in what you need when you need it. When I was in New York once at Frank Ippolito's in the 70s, I used to study there with Papa Joe Jones, who played with the Basie Band and countless others. He was masterful. And people would come in, and he would tell them. He'd say, well, use this, and they'd say, for sound. They'd say, well, use that. That's what it's there for, the tone control. You know, you need to take a little bit of that vibration out, dial it in. You can dial this in so it just barely touches the top head. So I look at it and think, well, you have all these things at your disposal. You don't need, I mean, the tone control today, the alternative to tone control, guys have moon gel. You know? So, okay, so you have this. Let's take the tone control back off to back where it was. Or you have moon gel. You know, I mean, same idea. But if you have a tone control, you should use it. It's there, it'll help you. The other thing that all of this that kind of gets back to the whole tuning concept is I see a lot of people who haven't learned tuning for whatever reason are trying to compensate with other things. So then they'll say, well, then I need, the drums don't sound very good, so I go and I buy different kinds of heads. So they'll get the likes of like a Power Stroke bass drum, Remo Power Stroke bass drum head. So it's got this 2-inch wide muffling ring around the edges. And what that does is it alters the sound of the drum completely. It's not a bad thing, but it's not the pure sound of the instrument. It really, really emphasizes that low fundamental. It's very boomy, a little more one-dimensional, because you don't. It takes away when you want to play subtly. There's not a lot of great response from a head that's that thick and that muffled. It's kind of made for. It's made for playing in pop bands, funk bands, you know, where you've got that thing really. You really got a huge emphasis on that low fundamental tone. So you'll find people compensate by using different types of heads. Same thing on the batter and resonant sides of the drums. They'll use extra thick heads. You know, Emperors, which are like a thick version of an Ambassador. The Emperors were the heads that came out in the 60s because rock guys needed something a little more durable than a medium weight, so they made a thicker one. But now you've got all manner of different heads with muffle rings and everything there. But at the end of the day, 95% of the time, you can get the sound you need out of the drum if you learn how to tune it properly. When you think about, and I have not tuned this kit. This is the kit that Joel's going to use tonight for the clinic, and he hasn't tuned it yet. But okay, when you think about how the drums should sound, again, how they should sound is whatever you want them to be. But when I think about these, when I have the drum set up, I like, in my sense, and I usually don't need more than I don't even need this, but what's sitting here, 2 toms and a bass drum. I like to think of this as a chord. And the bass drum's like the root note of the chord, and this is like the 3rd, and this is like the 5th. So, you know, more or less, you know, close to. And people go, well, what note do you tune the tom to? You can't tune the tom to a note. It's not physically possible to take this and tune it to an exact pitch. John Good at DW is one of my best friends in the whole world, and the greatest marketing campaign in the world is the shell that says D sharp. It's like, I don't care what it says on the thing. When you put the heads on and tune it, it is not going to be D sharp. It's never going to be perfect. It's not a timpani. But what you do is you tune to pleasing intervals, and you look for sweet spots on the drum. Guys will go, you know, I can't get enough out of the kit. The kit's no good. I don't know what, I got to get a new kit, or I got to get new heads. I said, well, what do you do? Well, I play in an 8-piece fusion band. So, well, what's your kit? Well, I got 12, 14, 18. I said, well, that's problem number one. I mean, there is not just necessarily one thing for every gig. I mean, you got guys who, you know, Mel Lewis could drive the Thad Jones Mel Lewis big band with a 20-inch bass drum. You can't. Dave Garibaldi played with Tower of Power with a 20-inch bass drum. You can't. It's mic'd, of course. But generally speaking, you know, you got guys who want their toms to sound like John Bonham, and they're playing a 12 and a 14. So, well, it's not going to work. You know, you're going to tune that 12 down so much that you're dumbing it down to the point where pitch-wise it's almost right, but there's no response because the head is so flubby that you're killing yourself to try to play. So sometimes the deal is, if your gig is in a Zeppelin cover band, then you need a 10 by 14 at least a 13, 16, 18, or ideally a 14, 16, 18, and a 24 maybe, or a 26 for a bass drum, because otherwise you're killing yourself for nothing. Those drums can be tuned at the proper sweet spot and give you the tone you want. So trying to drag everything out of a single drum sometimes is a mistake. I like to tune really high. So for me to have this Dynasonic tuned up where it is, I like it. But if I needed something, if I needed an 8x14 kind of solid, I'm not going to try to do that on this drum. It doesn't make sense. Just bring an 8x14 or bring a 6.5. Most everybody here, I guarantee, has more than one snare drum. So bring whatever it is that makes sense. So when you think about it, and I want to let people ask questions, and I will demonstrate whatever we can, and we'll do whatever we can. But when I think about it in the context of the whole thing here, the first thing I do is I do the top head a little tighter than the bottom so that the sound projects out, and I get the rebound so it makes my life easier. I use regular heads, try not to choke the snare, and try to just think in terms of the room and the audience, what you need to do to adjust to that can be done if you have a tone control by using that, or wound gel if you need it. But there are ways to dial it in to fit the music. Again, I don't use a drum dial. I tune by feel and by ear. When I tune the toms, I tune them to what I think is a pleasing interval. I don't care for the toms sound melodically nice, and then the bass drum sounds like that, cannon shot that goes through your chest. And it's like, to me, it doesn't work. If it works for the gig you're on, no problem. But I like there to be that blend of sound between the toms and the bass drum, that it all kind of works together, instead of it sounding like two totally different instruments. When that bass drum just sounds like a huge boom, but the toms have a nice melody to them, it seems disjointed. So when you think about how we tune things and how we demonstrate, that's what we do. And to me, again, if you tune it the way we suggest, with the top being a little tighter, it is going to make your life easier. You're not going to have to work as hard to get the sound out of the drum. I mean, I'd rather just than be killing myself trying to draw singles out of it because there's no rebound on the head. You wear yourself out, and it's not necessary. So, and again, different bearing edges, we talked about that a little bit. So there's a whole bunch of information there.